Welcome back to another episode of my space exploration speedrun. In this episode we'll be running more outposts and we'll also be launching ourselves into space. At the beginning we're just setting up another 2 lines of iron. I go back to the mall to grab some more items for outposting, and I also do some inventory management. There I'm just adding in productivity modules to the labs so that the amount of science that they consume is less compared to the research that they produce. Since I ran out of rocket fuel, I'm using a little bit of concrete to quickly run over to the oil build to grab some more rocket fuel so I can go fly to the iron outpost. I wish there were just no trees. Here I'm upgrading some of the early smelter columns because they weren't originally built with red belts. So hopefully there, both the iron and the copper will produce a full 2 lanes. Here I'm splitting the red belt into 2 yellow belts for the steel, and I believe that that concludes all of the steel production for that section of the base. Here I'm adding in a few extra electric miners, and I decide that I need to balance the copper because one lane is receiving a lot less ore than the others. So I quickly put in a 4 belt balancer here, and then I have to wiggle around the belts to make sure that they go to the correct destinations. Here I'm trying to decide on which copper patch that I want to use for my electronic circuits, because we need to increase that for processing units. Processing units are the blue ones that take 20 each. Here, while we're over here, we're increasing the amount of stone that we're sending through so that we can make sure that we have all the glass that we need. There, I just quickly check whether or not I can research bot speed because the bots are very slow. Here I'm doing some finagling to get the extra line of stone to go to all of the sand assemblers. At first I think that I'm going to use red belts to get from that copper mine all the way up to the base, but then I have to go and add extra steam because we're running low on power. I'm a little bit confused why the steam turbines aren't running properly, so I add a bit of extra water. I just assumed that the ratio is different from vanilla. It turns out that some of the pipes were missing because the robot range of my personal roboport is really small. So there we add in a few extra pipes, and then we go over here and make sure that we're sending as much coal as we can to the steam engines before we send it up to the oil build. Here we do a bit more resource management and we grab some more belts. We're placing down another block of steam engines because if we're doing this task we might as well increase the energy because we're going to add extra outposts anyway. This setup will be fed mostly by coal. This time we're making sure that the bots actually place everything. We overbuild on water to prevent the issues that we've had previously with water. So here we're running a second line of coal for that steam engine setup. And then while we're over here we just siphon some of the coal offs to kickstart it. Here we do a bit more inventory management and then grab some more items from the mall. I'm deciding on how many belts that I need to actually set up the copper outpost. I figured that I'm actually running out of fuel for the furnace columns and also rocket fuel, so I decided to set up the bots so that they can duplicate the oil build. Now I'm clearing out some trees on the copper patch. At this point I actually decided to set up trains because I think that the amount of red belts that it's going to use is too expensive. I try and figure out whether or not I want to send the stone vertically up the bus, but then I figure out that I can grab some stone from the repair pack setup that I have to the right. So here I use a little bit of the extra long red belts, and then we have rail production. There I just grabbed some engine units off of the blue science production. I finally craft a locomotive at 8 hours. There's actually a speedrun for that, which is, I think it's 90 minutes? So under 90 minutes is the achievement, but the actual speedrun is probably around 30. Here I'm setting up 4 lines of copper. Because at this point I'm not actually production limited, I'm consumption limited. I don't worry about getting as much as I possibly can. The rocket production up in the base is actually way more than I need for just science. It's mostly there for producing platforms and also the space sciences, but we're not doing those yet. So here I'm doing the last of the sciences that I can do with rocket science. And also making sure that I have all the sciences that I need to set up the space base. The circuit transmission research is actually really important for the space base because it allows the space base to act like a requester chest and send the required resources down to navis. So here we're setting up some stack inserter production, and eventually we'll set up filter inserter production as well. I'm grabbing all the resources I need to set up the train stations, and also the locomotive and cargo wagons. Here I actually reclaimed some of the red belts because I didn't want to use them just for this part of the patch. Here I'm setting up the locomotive, and then I'm setting the one side of the schedule. Run out of rails, and then I also go back and place down the other side of the drop-off. Here I'm going and checking whether or not the fuel production is working properly. So I connect the last few pipes that were missing, figure out that the lube was actually disconnected, and then I place down the tanks that are required and then add in the belts. So here I do a bit of rearranging. Back down to the copper outpost. It's okay because the mines are still running and filling that train up. Whenever I watch speedruns I always find it funny with the squiggly rail lines instead of the nice formal blocks. Now I'm setting up the drop-off side, and I'm connecting the fuel for the train. Here I'm adding the station to the schedule, and then I'm powering the inserters. Now I'm going to integrate these 4 lines into 2 of the copper columns and set that up for more circuit production. I actually figure out here that some of the inserters are wrong and I was placing rocket fuel on the fuel line. It doesn't really matter, they're both fuel and they both burn, it's just a little less efficient. Here I clear out a space for the logistics rocket I mentioned before. The benefit of this layout is that it doesn't just work for the rocket, it also works for the space elevator. My first version of the logistics rocket only worked for the logistics rocket, which meant that by the time I got the space elevator, I didn't want to put in the effort to completely rearrange all of the belts that were feeding it. Here I'm setting all the recipes for the cargo sections. Unfortunately with blueprint ghosts, if they sit around for too long, they actually disappear. So in a few different places in this space there's disconnected belts because a tree blueprint ghost for deletion actually disappeared after a certain amount of time. So here I'm routing the cargo sections over to the ghost of the rocket. I'm also spacing out and realizing that I don't need that much extra rail on the sides. Here I'm grabbing a whole bunch of steel so that I can start crafting the actual rocket. The silo building requires a lot of different items and I don't have enough inventory space to manage it, so I end up putting a whole bunch of stuff in the chest so that I can go around the factory and pick up stuff. Here I'm setting the recipes for the tier 2 speed modules, and I'm also rearranging the electronic circuit balancing. Back to the task of creating the rocket silo. Here I'm creating the 12 storehouses that go either side of the silo. I'm also routing some extra stone to this column because it was missing some. There I placed down the 12 storehouses. Each storehouse allows for 4 unique different items to be passed on to the logistics rocket. Here I'm adding in the stack filter inserters, because they're required for the logistics rocket. I realized that I wasn't doing any science because that science requires military packs and this base doesn't produce military. Here I'm routing in some extra stone to that copper column that I set up earlier. Here I'm running around fixing up the fuel lines and also adding in some extra red belts. I originally downgraded the splitters to yellow, but then I realized that red would probably be better in terms of the throughput. Here I'm grabbing a whole bunch of blue circuits so that I can produce the transmission sender and receiver. I also grabbed some more blue circuits specifically for the rocket silo. Here I'm running out of space again. I'm crafting the tanks and I'm crafting the radars. That's the first meteor strike that actually hit the base. Actually no, the second one, because the first one hit the top of the red circuits. Here I'm crafting the first two warehouses, and these will be placed in orbit to provide the space base with resources. Finally crafting the cargo rocket silo. So, how do you send a signal down to the ground when you don't have the base up in space? Well, of course, you place the signal sender on the ground. So this is basically the shopping list that will be up in space. So here I'm making sure that the signals are being sent through correctly, and it turns out the constant combinators weren't in my inventory. So now the ground base is receiving their signal for the requirements. And so far, the only things that we're loading are the low density structures and the heat shielding. But that will soon change. So here I'm trying to figure out how I want to craft the space capsule. I think in my previous run I put it next to the rocket science production. But in this one we're dumping everything into the warehouse and then the assembler is taking out of the warehouse. So here I'm routing over the rocket control units and also the rocket fuel. Here I'm shuffling around the circuits so that I can fit the assembler right here. The warehouse closest to the rocket silo contains all of the ingredients that come off of the belts, but then it doesn't fill up all the way, it only grabs 100. So here I'm routing over the glass required for the space capsule. Here I'm routing over some of the iron, and then some of the stone. Here I'm routing over the electronic circuits and the electric motors. Obviously grabbing a few more belts from the mall. And here I'm routing over the red circuits and the blue circuits. Here I changed some of the circuits that it puts less in the warehouses, because I ended up with a lot of rocket fuel sitting in the warehouse. Now I need to place down a little bit of rocket fuel to liquid rocket fuel production. So here I wiggle in a bit of piping. Now I'm loaded up on the space capsule, the rocket sections, the rocket fuel, and also loading up on the cargo. Here I'm checking what the bare minimum resources are required for the space science. So we need steel, lube, stone, rocket fuel, electric motors, and batteries, I believe. At this point we're basically routing everything over to the rocket silo. There I noticed that the copper production is actually a bit low. So here I rebalance the lines so that the station producing the copper from the outpost actually gets sent along the line, because we need the copper mostly for the rocket silo instead of the electronic circuits. Here I spend the time to redirect all of the belts. So once upon a time the rocket science was being sent right to left, and now it's being sent left to right. This is because we need to send all of the sciences up to space. Because of this, we also pick up all of the labs. But we have another 4 unique items being delivered to the logistics rocket. Here I figure out that the requests from space actually use ingots at the moment. So on the ground I also need to interpret the logistics ingot request as also plates. So I multiply the ingot request by 10 to get the number of plates that I want. Here I realized I actually lowered the negative value too low so that the rocket wasn't actually being loaded. So here I'm routing up some steel, and this is because we need to barrel up most of the oil products and then put them into the rocket. The lube is one of the requirements for the space science, because we need to produce the space belts. Extend 2 lines because eventually we'll be sending 4 different liquids, but we're not doing all of them yet. Here I do some inventory management and put the items that are going to be loaded into the rocket into the warehouses because it's better in the rocket instead of in my inventory. I grab some extra red belt to increase the throughput on the copper lines. I check the status of how much the rocket is loaded. I then go put away all of the items that you can't place in space because we don't need them when we're in space if we can't place them. I also check the status of the production of the nuclear, and it turns out that ages ago I set the output priority left on the splitter instead of balanced. So for this whole time, all of the processing units have been going towards centrifuges. At this point, I also decide to rearrange all of the electronic circuit balancing, because the way this base was designed was that the electronic circuits are balanced properly in terms of their production. The reason I rearranged it earlier is because I only had one of the columns built, but now that I have most of the columns built, I want to have the balance correct. We have a significant amount of electronic circuits going over to the processing units, and then we have a little bit on the left side going to the mall. The rocket's almost full. We do a little bit more inventory management. We check the shopping list. And then I realized that if I go into space right now, I will suffocate. So we need to craft some of these secure canisters, which are basically breathing modules. I start crafting them by hand, but then I realize that's a bit slow, so I start using the assemblers. But these secure canisters aren't actually life support modules yet, so I have to add a processing unit, and then I also need to fill them up with air. So here, because of the life support capsules, you actually want a little bit of coal in space so that you can resupply your life support while you're in space. Here I also add in a line for the plastic and sulfur, because we need a little bit in space as well. You'll notice that the rocket is actually already full, but the idea is that the first rocket will be some of the items and then we'll just send more and more until the requirements are saturated. We check the shopping list again. Actually, not yet. So here we're crafting the life support capsules, and you'll see in this blueprint on the right there's the life support module, and I'm checking whether or not I need 2 life support manufacturers or just 1. Turns out you only need 1 life support facility and then 3 decontamination facilities. Here I'm checking the status of my speed modules, and it turns out that even though I only did it this episode, I already have a ton of tier 2 speed modules. I end up with 16 life support modules, and then I pick up the life support facilities for use in space. I also grab some efficiency modules because the tiles in space are very limited, and if you can use efficiency modules you can reduce the amount of solar power that you need. We dump out some more of the Northeast buildings. We also grab some bots. We grab a few red circuits so that we can craft logistics bots for space. We grab some extra inserters, grab some power poles. One of the things that we're missing are the big electric motors, which are the green ones, not the blue ones. A little bit more inventory management. So here we grab the big electric motors, I think. We not only grab them, we set up a belt to pass them down to the rocket. I also craft a few extra chests for my personal inventory, and you'll see why in a minute. We also grabbed some extra roboports. So here I grabbed a ton of the green motors, and we're off. You can see there I dumped my whole personal inventory into the chest because when I run around I'm grabbing the inventory of the rocket because it crash landed into these cargo pods. So by doing this I can do quick inventory management. There I make sure that I have some rocket fuel on my body because otherwise I will jump off the platform and I'll keep drifting away. Here I place down the second warehouse so that it can help with my inventory management. There I'm grabbing the few machines and assemblers and stuff from this space, and then I'm putting them in my personal inventory chests, as opposed to the resource chests. And now I'm preparing everything for the next episode. In the next episode we'll be setting up the space base, and we'll be hopefully trying to supply it with as many resources as we can. Then we'll be focusing on setting up the Vulcanite planet. So we've almost set up a clean slate for the next episode. We'll be picking up all of the different tiles so that we can use them for our own purposes instead of the structures that are already there. We're grabbing out the few machines that were picked up by the bots. making sure that the chests are only resources instead of machines. As the robots finish the last tiles, thank you for watching. See you next time.